Hey guys, welcome to class. Welcome to Veritas Wellness Introductory class, the movement class this week. Excited to talk about movement. I specifically call it movement, not exercise, because kind of like the word diet, we've perverted, or there's a connotation with these words like exercise. So I'm not going to tell you to go to the gym every day and work out for 45 minutes. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But we're going to talk about why this is such an important and foundational pillar for health and wellness. As you well know, we're all about setting a basic foundation: nutrition, hydration, movement, and peace. And we feel like if you have that foundation, then your risk for chronic disease and acute infection gets minimized greatly. And even if you get one of these infections, you'll be able to nip it really quick if you have this foundation in place. All these chronic diseases that are overcoming Americans and really the Western world is clearly epigenetic, not genetic, as we talked about earlier. So one of these epigenetic influences on your genes and on health and wellness and chronic disease is movement or lack thereof. And we'll start with this headline. The thing I want to point out here in this, and I won't go through every single study, but this kind of summarized. There's studies that show cancer, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, back pain are all increase. Your chance of having these diseases increase just with sitting. So they neutralize all the other factors like smoking and diet and genetics and all that stuff. They neutralize all that, and just sitting will increase your risk of these diseases. Cancer and cardiovascular disease, those are your top two killers. Half of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic now. So just getting up and moving and not sitting all day is going to minimize your chance of disease. And these studies have gone on to say that it's more dangerous, sitting all day is more dangerous than smoking, kills more people than HIV, and is more treacherous than parachuting. So something as simple as just get up out of your chair every day. I know it sounds too simple, but every hour really is what we want you to do, is going to have biochemical effects in the body that will diminish your risk for disease. So here are your reasons to move, and I want you to keep these in mind. And notice the very bottom thing here. The reason not to move is to burn more calories out than you put in that day. I think that's what most people think about with movement or exercise, is they need to go burn more calories out than they put in so they can maintain their weight. Weight is so associated with exercise in our culture, and we've got to break that association. So focus on these top four things: oxygenation, hydration, detoxification, and then recharging your battery packs is a new and interesting phenomenon or an understanding that we have now. And we'll talk about all four of those reasons to move throughout the class today. But just keep those big concepts in mind. You're moving in order to move oxygen around the body, in order to hydrate yourself, kind of like we talked about last week with that French hand surgeon. Detoxification and recharging those battery packs are really your acupuncture meridians, because really the body is an electrical, quantum physics type of situation when you get down deep enough, and you need to recharge the energetics of that system. So not to burn more calories than you put in your mouth that day. To drive that point home a little bit more, there's this great book. This is by George Blackburn. He's MD, PhD out of Harvard. This set point. So think of your body as having a thermostat. And what he talks about thoroughly in this book, which you can read if you want to, but I'm just going to summarize in a nutshell here. There's studies like the Vermont overfeeding study, where they took a bunch of prisoners and fed them like 10,000 calories a day. And what they showed in this study was those prisoners did gain weight, obviously when you're feeding a ton more calories. But what happened right after that 10-week study, or really as that study was going on, is these inmates, their thermostat increased, their metabolic rate, their basal metabolic rate. So that's like those mitochondria, those carburetors are burning through fuel at a certain speed, and that's your set point. That's where your thermostat's set. But as you overfeed, then your body increases that set point, increases that thermostat, increases your metabolic rate to end up matching that 10,000 calorie a day intake. That was the Vermont overfeeding study. And then there was a Minnesota starvation study where they showed the same thing. They reduced the calorie count for this for these test subjects, and what happened was, yes, they lost weight, but then the body reset its thermostat. It turned the thermostat down, the metabolic rate down to match that lower calorie. And that's what we see over and over and over. This has been well documented. You can do a starvation diet and you'll lose some pounds, 10% of your body weight or something like that in the first few weeks, but over time you don't, and you actually gain it back because the body's matching through this thermostat set point mechanism. It's going to match it. It's going to turn its metabolic rate down if you eat too little. It's going to turn it up if you eat too much. So over the long haul, that concept of calorie in, calorie out doesn't really work. You'll have minimal and frustrating effects if that's all you're going to do. This idea and concept is talked about more in these books, Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes and Good Calorie, Bad Calorie, Eat Fat, Get Thin, and Fat for Fuel. Lots of literature, lots of studies. If you're a kind of a health nut junkie and want to read all the studies, get these 4 books and you'll be very well versed, probably better than your doctor, on how and why we get fat. And it has nothing to do with the calorie in, calorie out theory. That's an inaccurate, incomplete understanding. So, and the take-home point on these books is gaining weight is really all about fat storage hormones. So as you remember, hormones are signals in the body. It's how the body communicates, like your brain to your kidney or your kidney to your liver, the liver to the heart. These organs secrete hormones. Hormones are proteins that have a certain cut or shape, kind of like a key. And those hormones float around the body until they find the keyhole, their corresponding keyhole, and they lock in. And when that happens, and that sends a signal to the DNA to do something. That's how hormones work. So hormones are communicating molecules. So there's certain hormones that send a signal to store fat, to make a fat cell and store fat into it. And really you can't store fat without one of these hormone signals being initiated. And as you see here, there's 3 primary ones. These are the big ones: insulin, estrogen, and growth factors. Growth factors is a group of hormones that, or chemicals that get released when you're inflamed. And with the inflammation, you need to think about iron, and we'll talk about that later in the class too. So I'm going to focus right now on the insulin because that by far and away is number 1, and that's what these 4 books really talk about, is this insulin spike that tells you to store fat. If you can drop that insulin spike, you won't store fat. So let me kind of draw that out a little bit here on a graph that represents an average standard American day. Let's say the average American wakes up, has a cup of coffee with some creamer that's got sweetener in it, and then they have a whole wheat bread, piece of toast, and then they have a Special K cereal, and then they have some skim milk with that cereal, and they have a little jam on their toast, and some OJ. Well, what this red line represents is the blood sugar spike. As we talked about previously, and Dr. Bill Davis talks about in his book Wheat Belly, the modern wheat starts to be broken down into glucose or sugar within 5 seconds of you chewing on that wheat. So that whole wheat toast, whole wheat bread, you're immediately changing that into sugar. You're spiking your blood sugar. There's nothing left in skim milk really, but what can change into sugar? Juice, orange juice, cranberry juice, any kind of juice is nothing but pure sugar too. And so we have the milk, the juice, the cereal, all this spikes. If you have a sweetener in your coffee, you're spiking your blood sugar. When you spike blood sugar, especially when you spike it very, very rapidly, which is what the standard American modern diet does, processed flours and sugars get into the body very quickly, so you get a huge, quick surge. If you ate an orange versus drink orange juice, the orange juice is going to have an immediate surge of blood sugar, where the orange is going to have a slower elevation. It's going to take more time because of all the fiber and all the other nutrients that are in that orange are going to cause it to slow that absorption down. But the modern diet, it's a very rapid spike. Well, that rapid spike causes your pancreas to secrete insulin rapidly and aggressively. So you get a big insulin spike. Insulin causes the sugar to get out of your blood and into the cell. So the sugar's moving out of the blood. So what happens is the blood sugar will then fall within an hour or 2, and then the insulin will fall also. And with that big roller coaster fall like that, you will get tired and sluggish and hungry. So it's about mid-morning now, and your standard American about 10 a.m. is looking around the office for a snack. So then we eat like a whole wheat cracker with peanut butter on it, or a donut, or a candy bar, or whatever, but it's usually a carb, and that carb is going to spike the sugar again. And therefore your insulin will spike again, and then crash again. And then it's time for lunch, and we have a sandwich, again with the whole wheat bread, or a burrito with a tortilla, or some spaghetti or pasta, or some kind of carb. And then, we have a mid-afternoon snack, and then we have supper with a bunch of spaghetti or something. But the point is, your insulin is following the blood sugar up and down all day long. So what I've just drawn here is this blood sugar insulin roller coaster, up and down all day. Blood sugar crashing and elevating, crashing and elevating. Well, every single time that this insulin spikes, you're sending a signal to store fat, to make a fat cell and store that fat. That's what's happening. And so the American modern diet has perfected this roller coaster. It's an addictive and dangerous roller coaster to be on. So the goal is, and what ancestrally we see, is to get this blood sugar spike and insulin spike much lower. And even at some points, we want it to be flat, totally flatlined. And you do that by eating food that doesn't cause your pancreas to spike insulin. So that would be fat. Fat does not cause you to make insulin. Protein does not cause you to make much insulin. So that's where the low-carb, high-fat diet, aka keto or ancestral, comes in. But even Mediterranean and Paleo and any of these non-standard American diets, there can be some carbs, but we want them to be lower glycemic. Let me write that word here, glycemic, because you can look up any food's glycemic score. Hopefully you can read that, but just Google glycemic index in any food. Like do a white potato versus a purple potato, or sweet potato versus white potato. And you'll see a difference. So there's, the oatmeal is a great example. There's the modern, quick, easy, convenient, cheap microwave oats that highly processed versus the old-fashioned steel-cut oats. There's a difference in the glycemic index on those because that old-fashioned steel-cut oat, it takes more work and it takes more time for the body to break that down and digest it into sugar, versus the modern quick 1-minute microwave oats get turned into sugar that quick. So the glycemic index is just an index that measures how quickly and how fast the blood sugar is going to rise. So there are some carbs you can eat that are lower GI, lower glycemic index, like the sweet potato, purple potato, black bean instead of white bean. Certain fruits like the dark berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, as opposed to the tropical fruits like bananas, pineapples, and the citrus fruits. Those are going to be a higher glycemic index, typically tropical versus the northern berries. So I'm not anti-carb, but I'm anti-standard, modern, highly processed carbs. And personally, when I can, I'm going to go with a sweet potato instead of a white potato because I don't want that big sugar spike. I'm not going to eat a banana every single morning and spike my sugar. I might have it occasionally. The berries are going to be more the standard go-to fruit. And when it comes to fruit, a good time to mention, you've got to think about where you live. And if you're living in the tropics, that's one thing. When the climate is such that it's hot, and if you're outside and you're sweating and you're utilizing some of that carb that goes in your mouth, versus if you're eating a bunch of tropical fruit up north in the middle of winter. You've got to think about seasonality. So when does fruit come into season? In the summer, and then it's out of season. And historically, you couldn't get access to this fruit all year round like we can now. And also the fruit's been hybridized for the most part, like apples. Apples are a great example. Your old traditional heirloom apples, a Red Delicious apple, a Granny Smith apple, that has a lower glycemic index, a lower amount of sugar, versus like a Fuji or a Honeycrisp apple. Those have more sugar. That's why you have to pay more for them too, because they know you will pay for them because they're sweeter and more sugary. So if you have access to Fuji apples all year long, all 12 months out of the year, that's not the most beneficial. Even though it's fruit, even though it's whole food, we need to be careful with that fruit, the hybridized and the 24/7, 12 months out of the year access to it. But back to the graph. We want to lower that glycemic index. We want to get the curve to be smaller and lower and occasionally flatline, which means fasting. So if you're a standard American, first thing I would do is just switch to lower glycemic carbs. And then after you do that transition, we want to decrease the portion size of your carbs and eventually have some meals with really no carbs, mostly just fat and protein. And you'll start to shift this metabolic curve and you'll start to shift this roller coaster too. But just remember, every time you eat carbs, especially processed carbs, you're going to spike insulin. Insulin tells you to store fat. And that's why you hear about these people go on a low-carb diet and they'll just drop 10 pounds like that, or 20 pounds or 30 pounds, because they just flatlined this roller coaster and that signal to store fat. Okay, so now estrogen. I just want to speak briefly on that. And guys, y'all have got estrogen too. It's not just a female issue. Now women, you obviously make more estrogen than men, and you have more estrogen keyholes or receptors than men do. But men, you still make it, especially as we age. And fat cells make estrogen. It's kind of this vicious cycle. So men, you start to spike that insulin and you make a fat cell, and then those fat cells, especially around the waist, around the midline from nipples to pelvis, this trunk fat, those fat cells make a type of estrogen called estrone, and men and women both make it, and then that estrone actually signals you to make more fat. So it's this vicious cycle. Women have more estrogen production capabilities and receptors because God designed it that way. A woman could become pregnant and they have to support two bodies at that point, both in utero and breastfeeding. So women need a little extra fat to be able to have that in case they do get pregnant. The other caveat here on estrogen is there are a lot of environmental estrogens. There's a lot of chemicals in the environment that look like or mimic estrogen, that keyhole. These chemicals have a shape similar enough to estrogen that fits that estrogen receptor in the body and turns that mechanism on to store fat. These are called xenoestrogens, xeno with an X, X-E-N-O, estrogens. And you can Google that, look that up, you can get a list of them, but in general it's going to be the plastics, like plastic water bottles, the BPA that's in the plastic, and it's going to be a lot of the agricultural chemicals can mimic this, and some of the antibiotics too can act like xenoestrogens, so that's another good reason to eat organically. But also birth control pills, and birth control pills are urinated out by women, and that gets into the water supply, and there are many studies that show municipal water supplies that have estrogens in the water, and it's from the birth control pills. So another good reason to get clean water, filtered water. So estrogens, you want to try to limit your environmental exposure, and then you really want to limit this whole insulin spike because you're naturally going to decrease your fat cells and therefore your estrogen production. And then down here, the growth factors. Inflammation is a broad term. There's lots of triggers and drivers of inflammation. Even just insulin all by itself, these spikes right here, every time you spike insulin and you're storing fat cells, insulin by itself drives inflammation. And then the fat cells secrete chemicals that are pro-inflammatory. So this inflammation word, it's again a vicious cycle too. Just fat cells themselves are pro-inflammatory. But I mention iron here because it is an often underlooked or overlooked part of the inflammation cascade, and I think it's very foundational, especially in people who have done a lot of work nutritionally and lifestyle-wise and they're still inflamed. You really need to consider iron. There's an entire lecture on iron on our YouTube channel, Veritas Wellness. I'd encourage you to go look at that. I presented that at the Weston A. Price annual conference in 2019, and it's also available on their website. But in a nutshell, what I'm going to say is that iron is stored in the body, and there's no known excretory mechanism for iron. So once it's in you, it's in you. And it is in you if you've eaten a standard American diet. It's in the baby formula. It's not in breast milk, and I'm not going to go into that, but God's design of the breast milk was perfect. We questioned that and thought we knew better, so we started adding it to the baby formula, unfortunately. And then we started fortifying it into the food, mostly cereals, but the grains have been fortified since the 1940s. This iron fortification has been in play to the tune of 1 cup of multigrain Cheerios has about 18 milligrams of iron in 1 cup. So 2 cups, obviously, double that. And if you get other sources of grain throughout the day, you're going to have a whole lot of iron in one day. And the requirement of the body is 1 milligram. You need 1 milligram of iron every day because that's naturally what you lose through your intestinal sloughing of the lining of your intestine. You'll naturally lose a little bit, but otherwise the body has no way to get rid of iron. So we've been pouring it in since we were babies on formula and cereal and all the way through, and it gets stored in our tissues. And we have a capacity to handle some of that, but over time that we overflow our storage capacity. And if you're not properly nourished, you can't even store it right. So iron's a big deal. And the only way to really get rid of it is to donate blood. And that's a great little side tip here. I know we're not talking about the actual movement yet, but it's one thing to move on down to your local blood donation center. Donate blood quarterly. The studies have shown that people that donate blood regularly have better longevity and less chronic disease. And it's because this excess iron in the tissues drives inflammation. Inflammation drives the growth factors, and people can stay stuck as far as their weight goes just from iron overload. Even if they've dealt with insulin, even if they dealt with estrogen, they're doing hydration, they're doing the things right. If they have that excess iron, the macrophage, which is the Pac-Man that eats up not only bad germs like COVID, but it also eats up in fat cells. So the way you burn a fat cell is a macrophage has to basically metabolize that thing. And that Pac-Man can't do that if it's full of excess iron, which it will be if you haven't dealt with this whole iron issue. So that's a little kind of tangent on the fat storage hormones, but I put this in the movement lecture because we have associated exercise so much with weight loss and being fat or losing fat and that kind of thing. And so I thought it'd be a good time to reinforce this understanding that making a fat cell is really a hormone issue, not an exercise issue. So moving on. Things not to do. We're about to get into things or why we do exercise, which is oxygenate, hydrate, detoxify, and recharge your batteries. But here's the things to keep in mind to not do. We've already discussed the calories in, calories out. I think we'll beat that dead horse. But this extreme endurance event, I throw that in there because we see a lot of patients who think they're healthy. They come in with symptoms, but they think they're doing the right things, and they're marathon runners or triathletes or these hardcore extreme athletic events. And they may be trim and thin, but they're very symptomatic. And the primary thing they're symptomatic from is adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion. And all that means is the adrenal glands are 2 small little bean-shaped glands that sit on top of your kidney. And when you're under stress, chronic stress, those glands get impacted in a negative way that will create lots of symptoms. The adrenals are just a backbone. They produce 50 different hormones for the body, and they're a backbone for your health. And these extreme endurance events can really tax the adrenals. The body interprets these extreme events as a stressor. So people that do these routinely, even just a one-time event, that's a stressor, but especially people that engage in these extreme exercise activities over and over and over, you've got to be careful. I'm not saying it can't ever be done, or you shouldn't ever do it, but be very careful. If you feel led to do that, you got to do it in the right way, and I would definitely take a long break in between. But I honestly believe that you probably don't need to be doing a whole lot of that. And then this other notion on the other end, maybe you're not being extreme, but you're being real consistent with this 45 minutes at the gym every day or every other day, and that's okay. There's benefit to it. I'm not saying not to do that, but it does not mitigate that very first slide I showed you, sitting is a new smoking. So if you're sitting in the office for 8 hours and then at the end of that 8 hours went and did your 45-minute workout, that does not erase all the negative impacts of the 8 hours of sitting. So it's more important to move throughout the day. Get up every 30 minutes or every 60 minutes or so and just move a little bit. You can go to the gym at the end of the day too if you enjoy doing that and that's fits in your schedule and all that kind of thing. But just don't only do that. You're still going to be at risk. I'd rather you move in these short, frequent bursts too, which we'll talk about later. These high-intensity interval training or HIIT training, that's when you go real hard for 30 seconds, real intense as fast as you can with whatever you're doing, whether it's lifting weights or treadmill or jumping jacks or swimming or whatever. You go in as fast as you can for 30 seconds. and then you stop and you just go into cruise control at this slower mode for 90 seconds. And then back to 30 seconds of real intense, real fast, and then back to 90 seconds of slow pace. This interval up and down just for 7 minutes is more beneficial than 45 minutes of all out, just constant pace like an aerobics class for 45 minutes. You really want to alternate back and forth, that kind of burst training. All right, so just to remind you, and we're going to get into each of these 4 things: oxygenation, hydration, detoxification, and then recharge the batteries. So you remember with oxygenating the mitochondria, we've talked about from a fuel perspective last time. Remember the mitochondria are the carburetors in each cell. You have a couple 100, 500 maybe per cell, except for the high energy output cells. So that's your heart muscle cells. They have about 5,000 mitochondria per cell. Your brain, same thing. That's a high energy output. Those neurons, so they have more mitochondria. The cells with the most mitochondria is actually the female egg cell, and it's got about 300,000 mitochondria. But the mitochondria, just think carburetor, think energy production. Hopefully by the end of the class, everyone will be able to draw this diagram of the cell with the nucleus, the DNA, and then the mitochondria. The mitochondria is that fuel, or the carburetor that takes your fuel and mixes it with your oxygen that you're breathing in, plus the spark plug, those are your minerals, to give you your energy called ATP. And remember, the fuel can be either sugar or fat, and when you use fat for fuel, you'll make about 140 ATP. And when you use sugar for fuel, you'll make about 34, give or take a couple ATP. And remember, with fat for fuel, you make very little exhaust or free radicals. That's the pro-inflammatory things. And when you burn sugar for fuel, you make more free radicals. Just that's the overview. But we're talking about movement today and the oxygen. And this is the primary reason you want to move. You want to breathe deeply. And when you breathe deeply, which you will when you move, obviously, you'll breathe deeper than when you're not moving. You're going to get more oxygen going into this system, and you're going to be more energetic. Don't forget, there's 7 cell membranes that oxygen has to pass through between your lung and that carburetor. Those cell membranes are made of fat. The fat needs to be the anti-inflammatory fat that allows oxygen to move through it easily versus your pro-inflammatory fat that repels oxygen. And remember, the pro-inflammatory fats are your modern fats. So all those quote-unquote heart-healthy seed oils like soybean oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, margarine, Crisco, which is just hydrogenated cottonseed oil. Stay away from those. Do the ancestral fats: real butter, heavy cream, lard, tallow, olive oil, coconut oil, and avocado oil are some examples. Palm oil would be another good one. So the oxygen needs to move through those cell membranes, but you need to move in order to oxygenate. So we want to feed this mitochondria plenty of good oxygen. We do that by breathing deeper. Hydration, we talked about last time. I'm not going to play the video again, but just to refresh your memory, this Dr. Jean-Claude Gumberto, he's the French hand surgeon who was doing that surgery, and he was recording it on a video. It's a fiber optic wrist surgery. Once he had his nurse put a tourniquet around the arm, that cut off the blood supply, and then he immediately could see the water coming out of the fascia. The fascia is that spiderweb material. And remember, those water droplets will come out of that fascia more efficiently and effectively when that fascia is being twisted by movement. So getting up every hour to squat or walk or twist or stretch, even just sitting in your chair doing some stretches, you're going to cause that fascia to irrigate the body better. And that's half of hydration. Gina Bria's book, Quench, talks about this at great length. Half of hydration is eating your water, and the other half is moving so that you can actually move that water around the body. So very, very important to move in order to hydrate the body. So oxygenation, hydration, and then detoxification. So detoxing in the body, we can talk about real quick. And personally, I'm not real big on everybody having to do extra stuff to detoxify. I know there's lots of cleanses, there's lots of different things for detoxification, and we do that, occasionally with patients who are sick and have been exposed to lots of of toxins, so I'm not saying to never do that. But in general, I think the body will detoxify itself automatically, all by itself, just right, just fine. If you keep the basics, if you're hydrating and giving yourself the nutrients and moving, your body's going to naturally do what it does, which is detoxify. So real quick, toxins, number one, we are very, very toxic as a society. There's so many chemicals in our environment now. There was a study, I think it was in the year 2000, 10 Americans study. The Environmental Working Group did this, so you could look that up. Just type in 10 Americans, Environmental Working Group. And what they did was they took 10 babies born in America, and these are healthy moms, healthy pregnancies, normal, healthy deliveries, and they took the cord blood at the time that they clamped the cord and cut the cord at the time of delivery. And they took the cord blood, sent it to the lab, and sampled out and found 286, I believe, give or take, different chemicals in these babies on their first breath of life. And so obviously they were getting these from their mom in utero. And these chemicals range from flame retardant material that's found in our mattresses to pesticides, heavy metals, you name it, all sorts of different pharmaceuticals. And a number of these, dozens of these were known carcinogens even. So we're born toxic in the modern world, no doubt about it. We're breathing in toxins, not just in heavy smog, pollution cities, like, I don't know, Houston, where I went to medical school, had a lot of issues, of course, Los Angeles, China, but really it's the world. This air blows, the wind blows these toxins everywhere. So there's no doubt we've got an exposure to toxicity. We try to mitigate that by not purposefully toxifying ourselves. So you want to clean up your products in your home. So under your sink, all your cleaning products, and the wellness navigators can help you with this. Your daily things that you put on, from shampoo and soap and deodorant to toothpaste to makeup, all the different self-care and hygiene products. I read a study one time that said the average woman puts on, it was like 126 different chemicals in the morning. First thing in the morning, she walks out the door with 126 different chemicals she just applied to herself, from makeup and soap and deodorant and all that kind of stuff. So clean up that, and there's ways to do that. Nicole and Angie and Kim and our other navigators can help you with that. Of course, clean up your water and clean up your food. So that's very important. Don't go into some big detoxification program if you're just going to turn right around and retoxify yourself. Okay, so that's a little bit on toxins. But how does the body deal with this? So the way the body deals with this, we have cells that'll eat up these toxins and germs. Don't forget, your body's constantly battling these germs, and when they battle a germ, they chew it up, break it up. All these dead bug parts they don't just sit there in your cells. The body sends them into your garbage collection system in the body, and that's called your lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is a system of vessels, really from the top of your head to your toe, and just think of them as blood vessels, but they're not full of blood, they're full of lymph fluid. And this lymph fluid is a clear material, kind of like water, but thicker. And it's where the body dumps all the dead cells. Remember, your cells are dying and you're making new ones. So dead human cells, dead bug cells, toxins, any waste product gets put into this lymph system. And as this picture shows here, these vessels go just all over the body. But as you can see, there's no pump in this system of vessels. Like the heart, in your blood vessels, you've got the heart, but here you don't. You've got all these tiny little green dots. Those are lymph nodes all throughout the body, but there's no pump. So what causes this fluid to move around the body? It's your movement. These lymph vessels are all intertwined throughout your muscles. So it's the muscle contraction and relaxation that allows this fluid to flow. So you get lymph congestion, we call it, when you don't move. And kind of a real world example, you may have known some people who had breast cancer, and then they take out lymph nodes in the chest wall and into the armpit, because cancer spreads from an organ into the lymph nodes that organ drains to. These cancer cells go to those lymph nodes first, so surgeons will go in and cut out those lymph nodes to make sure you get all the cancer. But if you've taken out all the lymph nodes in the armpit, that disrupts the flow of the lymph fluid from the fingertips and the hand back up, you disrupt that flow. So what you'll get is lymphedema. That's swelling of that extremity. So you'll see some of these patients who've had breast cancer and they've had a mastectomy, they've had the lymph node dissection into the armpit, and they'll have swelling of that arm, and they have to wear a sleeve, a little compression hose on that arm, and that's to deal with the lymph congestion. Or another example is the lower extremities, especially as we mature or age, and these lymph vessels, kind of like the elastic on your socks, if you stretch that out too many times, that elastic loses its ability to tighten back up. Same with your lymph vessels. That can happen, and that lymph fluid can just sit in the lower legs, and you can get lymphedema or swelling of the lower legs. So these are some real-world kind of practical examples you may have seen. To avoid all these things, though, you need to keep those lymph vessels open and moving, keep the lymph nodes intact, but you need to move to get this fluid to flow. We have some patients who have a lot of lymphedema or have overexposure to toxins. What we'll have them do is rebounding. And rebounding is just these little trampolines where you bounce up and down. And there's dramatic changes in the G-force. When you go down and then come back up, I'm not an expert in physics and G-force, but I've read some on these mini trampolines. And it is a great exercise technique. That G-force is going to increase your bone density. It puts more strain on the bones, increases muscle mass, but it really helps that the lymph fluid to start to flow. So it's a great way to work with the lymph. We also utilize lymphedema specialists. So these are like massage therapists, but they have some special training in lymphedema massage, and they're able to work these lymph nodes and lymph vessels and move this fluid through people. So some of our really sick patients who start feeling worse before they get better, that worse when they start cleaning up their diet and lifestyle, it's this release of toxins into the system, but they overwhelm themselves with toxicity and they can't flush it out quick enough. We'll have them see a lymphedema specialist to help move that lymph flow out and detoxify better. But this trampoline is a mini trampoline, or rebounder is another great way to move that lymph fluid. Okay, recharge the battery. Jerry Tennant, I think I've talked to you about him before. He's an ophthalmologist near Dallas. He's probably close to 80 years old now. Excuse me, got to hydrate. I think I drank this the other day. I had someone ask me, what was that? So the wellness navigators are kind enough to juice, fresh juice for us at the clinic. And then I put chia seed in here. Remember, chia seed holds on to that fluid, and I put sea salt. And so this is actually structured water, full of nutrition and charged because it's structured, and full of minerals too. Remember, doctor up your drink. Back to Jerry Tennant though. So Dr. Tennant, brilliant guy. I highly recommend this book. And again, the Cliff Note version of his book is we're electric beings. And everything's about voltage in the body. If your body loses its charge, it loses its voltage, its potential hydrogen, then it cannot and will not function right. A cell that starts to lose its charge cannot hold oxygen. If you know anything about like fish tanks, if you depend on the pH of that water, it will hold more oxygen versus not. So if it gets too acidic, you can't hold very much oxygen. So we want to keep our oxygen carrying capacity in the cell optimal, and therefore we want to keep our charge optimal. And as you lose voltage, oxygen levels go down. When oxygen levels go down, that triggers the bugs to grow. So Candida, Lyme, Epstein-Barr virus, CMV, herpes, all these kind of occult bugs that are in the background, they will awaken and become a source of that whole inflammatory process and create a lot of symptoms. But they awaken when the voltage drops and the oxygen drops. That turns on these bugs. So a lot of integrative doctors will chase those bugs, which is fine. We do too. But you really have to chase the environmental factors that allow those bugs to wake up and overgrow. And one of those factors is a loss of voltage. So that's what Dr. Tennant's book talks about, and he has ways to recharge yourself, but the natural way to recharge is exercise. When you move, your muscles contracting actually bring electrons back into the cells. and they flow through the acupuncture meridians, which, remember, really is the fascia, that spiderweb material from head to toe. It not only carries your hydration, but it also carries a charge, carries the electrons, and the way to recharge those circuits. Think of the acupuncture meridians like the circuit breaker in your house. So there's different circuits for every room and every appliance, and you need to be able to recharge the circuits in the body. So like the hamstrings and the quads, think of it as a battery pack for a particular acupuncture meridian. Your biceps and triceps, that's a battery pack for another meridian. So all the major muscle groups charge different acupuncture meridians, and that helps maintain your voltage. Other things will maintain voltage too, like fresh juice, but really you need fresh vegetable. Grounding, where your feet can touch the ground. Sunlight into your cells will help to recharge also. So real basic stuff, but very, very powerful. But one of the best ways to decharge or use up all the charge in the cells is to sit. You sit all day and those muscles kind of get atrophic. They're never worked. They're never moving. They're stagnant, and you'll just lose voltage. So that's another important thing to remember. So let's review. Oxygenate. Your mitochondria need oxygen. Hydrate. Every cell of the body needs water. You're 99% water. Remember, 99% water by number of molecules in the body. Detoxification of all this toxic exposure our modern society has. And then recharge your batteries, because your body's really an electrical being. So keep those big 4 concepts in mind. It's not calories in, calories out. Okay, I like to bring this up. I know I talked about it, I think, in the first class, but it's a good time to bring it up in the movement. I really believe, I'm always thinking about God's original intent and how did He originally intend for us to move? Well, obviously outside. There weren't gyms in the Garden of Eden, or ancestrally, our ancestors, we're always outside. We're always working, moving, on the move, hunter-gatherers or whatever we were doing. It was always outside. So go on, sit all day, and then go to a gym with no windows and a bunch of sweaty people in there sharing their germs and whatever. Not as ideal as get outside, and get outside multiple times a day. If you can get your boss to let you have a little break, mid-morning break, a lunch break, a mid-afternoon break at the end of the day, but you can get outside 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, even just for 5 minutes. The sunlight will structure the water. The sunlight will recharge you. The movement will recharge you. And it also has an impact on your hormones, your mood hormones. It has a number of benefits. And some of them here in these studies, which a lot of these come out of Last Child in the Woods. Richard Lauv, he does a great job, and he's written another book after this one. But basically talking about nature deficit disorder, how just not being in nature has a big impact on your physiology. There's studies like this one, green spaces in cities can help people live longer. Other studies, residential green spaces in childhood associated with lower risk of psychiatric disorders in adolescence. And there's dozens and dozens and dozen more studies that correlate. I think it's about 400 studies that Loeb has in his book that talk about this amazing impact of nature. Looking at green space, walking in green space, just being in nature has a positive impact. So my encouragement to you is, with your movement, be outside as much as you can. Also, find something that's enjoyable. So if you've done the gym thing and you really don't like that, well, fine, don't do that. You don't need to do that. If you do like the gym, that's fine too. I'm not saying you can't do it, but you also need to get outside and get some sunlight. But most people can find something enjoyable to do outside, and just walking. I could do a whole hour lecture on all the studies that show the positive benefits health-wise of just walking. Not even at a fast pace, and even minimal amounts, even 10 minutes of walking. So find someone you enjoy being around and go on a walk with them, or your pet, or just be outside moving. So that leads us to some practical tips, and these are totally doable. And I hope y'all are getting this kind of message and this theme throughout these classes. Is there are very practical, simple, easy things like narrow the eating window. That's simple and practical. Add some sea salt to your water or whatever you're drinking. Doctor up your drink. Get up every hour, like I show you, or I recommend here, and just stand up. Even if that's all you did, stand up. If you can walk down the hall, it's even better. Go up and down a couple flights of stairs, even better. But reset your habits. Start to think like your ancestors. Your ancestors, none of them just sat all day long. You could consider a standing desk. I believe it's called I'm not sure if that's an E or an A, but veridesk.com. And they have these, you set them on your current desk. It's just a little platform, and it has some levers. You can raise it and lower it. So when you need to sit, you can sit. When you need to stand, you can stand. So Veridesk, and I'm sure there's other companies out there, but we use the Veridesk in our office, and we like those. So consider that, or just get a drafting table or some high table and get a high chair that goes with it. But occasionally you'll hop off the chair and stand up, sit when you need to. Try to get outside for a total of at least 30 minutes in a day. So that could be 3 10-minute breaks throughout the day, or numerous 5-minute breaks. But that 30-minute mark is pretty essential from a sunlight exposure perspective. Also, consider this unplugging and turn off. I really think a lot of the benefit of being in the green space and being outside and in nature is because your mind is allowed to unwind a little bit and de-stress and just cut your thinking off. So if you're constantly on your phone while you're walking around in green space, I'm pretty sure you're going to diminish a lot of the positive impacts of being outside and in nature. So just unplug, set the phone down for a little bit, especially a 5-10 minute walk outside. You don't need the phone necessarily. Just get it off of you or turned off. The big one here for sure, enjoy your movement. So don't get stuck with the thought of you got to go do 10 reps or 3 reps of 3 sets of 10 of a bench press. And if you hate bench press, don't worry about that. Go just walk outside, or play basketball, or play tennis, or ride a bike, or go swimming, or play bocce ball, or horseshoes, or whatever. Shoot a bow and arrow. I'm just thinking of all the things my kids do. But do something that's enjoyable, because if it's enjoyable, you'll actually do it again. You'll probably go, frisbee golf. Find something that you and your family like to do. I mentioned the HIIT training. That's another thing. A lot of people, they just don't have the time to go do 45-minute workout in the gym at the end of the day, and that's fine. I already mentioned that's not the most beneficial thing to do anyways. You can do a 3-minute, 5-minute, 7-minute workout, and it's this high-intensity interval training. That's a 30-90, 30-90, 30-90 for just a few minutes. Even 7 minutes is more beneficial than 45 minutes at a straight pace. Dr. Zach Bush, he's a great guy, I'd consider him a mentor, I think. He's taught me a lot. I've interviewed him once or twice on the radio, but you could just Google Zach Bush 4-minute workout, and that's an example of just something quick and easy. You don't need any equipment. It's super effective on improving your insulin resistance, improving your nitric oxide production, improving your endorphins, your good hormones. So simple, quick, and easy, and outside. I mean, if everybody could do a HIIT, 5-minute HIIT, a couple times a day, outside in the sunshine, that would be amazing. It'd be awesome. Resistance training, I do like to throw that in, because walking is great, but if you could add just a little bit of weight to that, that's even more beneficial, especially women who are at high risk for thin bones or osteoporosis, or if you already have osteoporosis or osteopenia, the precursor to osteoporosis. The bones are stimulated to grow thicker and denser when the muscles that are attached to the bone pull on that bone. So like my bicep, if I'm going to pull on something, that muscle, that bicep's got to be able to move this arm, move that bone, it anchors onto my lower arm bones right here. And just that muscle tugging on that bone stimulates the bone to grow and to be thick. So that's a very important concept to understand for osteoporosis, weight-bearing exercise. You want the muscles to have that resistance training. Just carrying a can of green beans in your hands while you're walking. Even just squatting, doing some leg lifts, even doing curls with no weight, just the weight of your arm. And that's still resistance training. If you can add a little bit of weight, even 1 or 2 pounds, that's great too. But that resistance training will build your bones, but also the muscles. When you have more muscle mass, the mitochondria in the muscles burn at a very clean and high metabolic rate. It's a lot more beneficial for your body to have muscle cells instead of fat cells. Fat cells are pro-inflammatory, muscle cells are anti-inflammatory is a good way to think about it. And as we age, we tend to lose muscle mass for lots of different reasons. So think about that, especially if you're in the second half of life. You may need to do some more specific resistance training to build that muscle mass. And just remember, I put here at the bottom, flexibility, balance, and strength. Those are the 3 things that'll keep you out of the nursing home. And if you're a young person watching this, you're probably not worried about nursing home, but you will be as you age, believe me. And what I would tell my patients, especially when I was in Post, Texas, in my family practice environment down there, what would put people in the nursing home is when they were falling at home and could not get back up. That was pretty much it. If they couldn't get off the toilet, if they couldn't get out of bed, and if they couldn't get up from falling. If you can't do those basic things, then you have to be in a nursing home where people can help you get off the toilet, bathe you, and get up when you fall. That was kind of the litmus test almost for when someone had to go into the nursing home, besides their mind going with dementia. So if you stay flexible and balanced and keep your strength up, that'll keep you active and keep you at home, keep you independently living. So those are important things to consider. Let's see here. Now, Veritas Wellness YouTube channel, which hopefully you're all subscribed to, there's a playlist on there for movement videos, and I recommend you go look at those. It's not all-encompassing. It's an introductory set of videos, but it has everything from resistance training to stretching, the quick 7-minute workout examples, things for balance and flexibility, just some basic movements. There's some examples of the HIIT training, high-intensity interval training, some different things for balance. And they're mostly simple. Most of them are things you can do in your office or home or at your desk. Don't require a lot of equipment. So really good and thorough. If you could implement some of these or most of these throughout your routine in the week, it would be super beneficial. That's Dr. Emily Edwards, my sister, and her business partner, Brooke Wagner. They're doctors of physical therapy down in Austin, Texas, and they were kind enough to help us out with these videos. So check those out on the channel and implement them into your routine. And most of this is just resetting your routine, your habits, get out of the standard American sedentary habit and reset these new habits. Also, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there. It's in the works, so be looking for it in the future. GridWorks. In fact, I just interviewed on my podcast Tim DeBusk, who is the founder of GridWorks, and it's a really unique and interesting combination of resistance training, flexibility, martial arts, kind of all in one. It's low impact. It's simple and easy. You can do it at home. It doesn't require a lot of equipment. And Tim just developed this after 40 years of his own personal experience in the movement world. He's combined a lot of these techniques into this GridWorks. And I really feel like it's going to be a really cool and foundational, kind of like a Pilates type thing. There's lots of different movements out there. Find one that you like and do it. But I just want to give him a plug because in my spirit, I feel like that's going to be kind of a real go-to that we're going to use in the future. All right, just want to leave you today with this: sitting is the new smoking, to remember how important movement is, as are the other pillars. But it's the simple, basic things that we've gotten away from as a society that we need to get back to. And when you get back to these, it can have a real impact on these major killers, cancer and cardiovascular disease in particular. I mean, cardiovascular disease is killing 630,000 Americans every year on average. Compared to, COVID-19, we're all talking about killing 20,000, 30,000. Who knows what the final number is going to be, not to minimize those deaths, but come on, 650,000, 630,000 every single year dying from heart disease, which is 95%, if not more, driven by epigenetics. not stewarding our movement, for example. These things outside the genes, it's all preventable pretty much. The 4 pillars are the foundation of that, as this study talks about with sitting. So these are real impactful things you're learning. It seems simple and basic, and it is. I think God's design is for it to not be complex. Our body's very complex, but the stewardship of it's pretty simple. We just have to believe it and do it. So great job for y'all being in this class, getting educated. You're going to be more than a leg up on the standard American for sure. And I just want to encourage you that any step you make in this direction of changing your diet and lifestyle is a beneficial thing. So keep up the good work. Watch those movement videos. Get with the wellness navigators for any specific questions, or even if you need some accountability, or even if you want to go work out with one or go on a walk with one of them if you're here locally. They would love to do that too. So don't forget to utilize those wellness navigators to meet your needs on a one-on-one basis. Okay. So we are through nutrition, hydration, and movement. Next week we're going to talk about the peace pillar, which probably that's more the foundation. And there's the other 3 pillars on top of that foundation. If you lack peace, it's hard to get well with just nutrition, hydration, and movement. So next week's a big one, and we're going to take a pretty deep dive into that, and I'm excited to talk to you all about that. So join us next week, and then the week after that we'll do a Q&A, basically wrap up and Q&A. So y'all be thinking about any questions y'all have. Y'all can submit them through the Wellness Navigators or submit them on our next live event too. Do we have any today, Tim? Okay. All right, guys. Have a great week. Keep up the good work. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.